This is Stigma, where we talk with leaders from many industries about how mental health and addiction have impacted their lives. Many people suffer silently from mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma. They never seek help because of stigma. In this podcast, host Stephen Hayes and his guests share their stories of recovery in order to encourage others to do the same. Here's Stephen.
Welcome back to another episode of the Stigma podcast. We are fortunate today to be joined by Mark Freeman. Mark is an author, mental health coach, workshop facilitator, and someone that I follow closely, as his frequent tweets and public commentary on mental health and well-being are really helpful for me as I live in recovery from addiction and live with bipolar disorder. Mark is from Toronto, and he describes himself as someone who creates products and services that help individuals and organizations use human-centered design and collaboration tools to overcome complex challenges. This includes peer support to people who are suffering from anxiety disorders, creating books and videos to fill the gaps in our healthcare system, leading meditation classes, and running change management workshops for Fortune 50 companies. Mark is the author of a book called You Are Not a Rock, which is a step-by-step guide to better mental health for humans. And you can learn more about Mark and his work, as well as his book, on his website at markfreeman.ca, where you can find out more about him, ways to connect, and you can learn more about The Brain School, which is an online community of over 200,000 followers spread across multiple social media platforms devoted to promoting proactive, preventative approaches to mental health and illness recovery. You can connect directly with Mark on Twitter at The Path to Change, and I will link the rest of his information in the show notes. And thank you, Mark. It's really great to have you here today.
Oh, no, thanks for having me, Stephen. Yeah, it's great to talk about mental health, but also talk about solutions and, what we can do and where we can go and things like that. So, I really resonated with your story because I think it is kind of similar to my experience, not thinking I had any mental health problems, then running into this, and then in getting out of the problems, realizing, we don't equip people to recover from these challenges at all. Like, we've just kind of ignored this entire industry, and then people are struggling without help. And that's just absurd.
Yeah, it is absurd. And one of the things that I really liked on your Twitter profile, it says stigma is a squirrel, run at it shouting. And I just had to ask, where'd you come up with that analogy and what does that mean?
Yeah, I think I came up with that analogy really early on when I was starting out, because I struggled with a bunch of mental illness diagnoses, but didn't think there was anything going on. Got over them. And then after getting over them and realizing there were tools out there, I just thought it was so weird that people weren't talking about that. And so part of it was frustration. I was realizing, like, people, and myself in particular, I was struggling because nobody was talking about these things they knew about. So part of it was seeing that actually there were people out there with knowledge that weren't talking because of stigma. But then also I live in Toronto, and we have these great, enormous squirrels, and they can seem kind of terrifying, and they're very greedy, right? They'll run up to you and steal your nuts. But if you run at them, they're actually quite scared, and they run away. And it was realizing that, stigma seems scary and seems aggressive, but if you're aggressive and you proactively protect your nuts, then the squirrels run away. And so that was kind of the approach I took to mental health. Yeah, we think about the stigma a lot, but if people just start to go out there and really start to kind of take up space to talk about mental health, the stigma disappears very quickly. And so we have to do that. We have to run at the squirrels and shout at them.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I'm going to probably steal that.
Please do.
You mentioned some of the struggles that you had in your past, and I know you've talked about it in your book, your personal experiences with compulsion and OCD and dealing with unpleasant emotions. And, for those who are listening to this and are coming across you for the first time, do you mind as briefly as you, I know you can't summarize a book in 2 to 3 minutes, but if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your experiences, I think people would love to hear that.
Sure. Because I think, so one thing is, I didn't think I was struggling with any mental health issues, because on one hand, it seemed like things were going really well. I was kind of, high performer, get out there and do stuff, but also my life was kind of progressively falling apart more and more spectacularly. And so when things were bad, when I finally started to get help, like I was doing things like I would stand in front of my stove and just watch it. I would go through this kind of like ritual to make sure it was off, but then I couldn't be sure because I was becoming very separated from reality. So I would just have to watch it. And there were a lot of things like that where reality was becoming kind of disconnected. Like I was convinced I wasn't me, so I was always checking photos, checking the mirror. I was always convinced my ID was going to get checked, and I was actually impersonating somebody else. I wasn't holding knives because I would see myself stabbing somebody or cutting off my own body parts or like feeling the knife drop into my foot, and it was very physical. There were a lot of the like kind of physical, like I would see harm happening to myself or others. Like if I was walking upstairs, I would always like see myself falling on the stairs and my teeth getting smashed in, and then my jaw would ache as though it had happened.
Wow.
And I wasn't. There was a school near where I live, so I wasn't going by there because if the kids were out, I would like see them falling and their heads breaking open. I didn't like. I was having trouble crossing the street, and that was part the reality thing, but part the harm thing. Like I would see myself getting hit, but also I couldn't be sure anymore about like really where the cars were. That makes sense. And
Yeah.
yeah, they were all like I was getting medical tests repeatedly. I was washing my hands under really really hot water because I couldn't be sure that I'd wash them, so I had to feel them like throbbing in pain from the heat.
Wow.
I kept every receipt. I was a terrible boyfriend. I was I had all sorts of relationship compulsions. It was kind of like everything. Like I could spend hours. I could spend an entire morning rewriting an email to get it to feel right because of what I thought the other person would think. And it was all of that. So because in many ways it was just a really unhealthy way of trying to control every uncertainty imaginable.
What made you decide to get help?
When I finally went to get help, I still didn't see any of that as strange. So I have to emphasize that to me, I had really good reasons for doing all of that. It was all totally rational. Like even I thought people were watching me and trying to poison me. Again, totally rational. So when I went to get help, it was for depression and addiction. So I knew I'd gotten to a point where like just the tiniest thing felt like the worst, like the end of the world. And I knew I was having some issues with sex. So I was like, oh, I can't, it doesn't seem like I can control myself. And so that's all I went in to ask a counselor about. I was like, I think I'm depressed and maybe there's some issues with sex.
Right.
Everything else was fine. And I was totally healthy.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I have an SAA group here that I go to, and I like to talk about it
Mhm.
because I think it's very easy to talk about AA. I think it's very hard for people to talk about process addictions and compulsive behavior. And
Yep.
so it's, as part of talking about stigma, I highly encourage people to be vocal about any addiction that they're dealing with, but also specifically if they're overcoming some sort of compulsive behavior, because it's a little more taboo because the stigma is excessively worse around
Yeah.
those addictions.
Yeah. And I think it's great you bring that up because I think something I always tell people now when I'm working with people is like, there's no way if you're running into any kind of mental health challenge, there's no way that it isn't also affecting your sex life
Yeah.
because that's so much about intimacy and being ourselves and vulnerability and uncertainty. And so it's pretty inevitable if there's stuff going on to kind of control and avoid difficult feelings elsewhere. I mean, at the very least, there's going to be an opportunity around sex and intimacy to learn some healthy skills.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of another thing I saw in your book, which is that mental health is this sort of holistic combination of work-life balance and how you use social media and how we present ourselves and how we function in relationships. And if we are new, kind of for me, if we're new to recovery or actively managing our mental health, then I was kind of curious for your ideas on where do we start to get better with this sort of holistic mental health approach. Do we start with addiction? Do we start with our misuse of social media? Where do we begin? It sounds like you began with addiction treatment or dealing with addiction. That's where I began. I was kind of curious your thoughts.
It's interesting too, because in the system they have all sorts of ideas about addiction and mental health being kind of separate. At least in the Canadian system, I know because when I ended up getting help, actually we didn't start with addiction because I was able to get into a research program. But one of the requirements of the research program, it was around therapy, was that you not have any addiction issues.
That's weird.
And I find those things are quite common though in research. One of the kind of reasons I always find when we're looking at mental health research that I'm quite skeptical of it, because they often try to create this very siloed, kind of unrealistic version of mental health, because the reality is often you're struggling with lots of different things. And so I had to learn how to handle the addiction stuff on my own later. I ended up really starting with therapy to start cutting out other compulsions. But now I actually encourage people. It's funny you mentioned social media there. I encourage people to start just by learning how to not check their phones when they get the urge to check, because that covers a lot of the fundamental basics. Like so much of mental health is just learning how to interact differently with the stuff in our heads. So if I can learn how to experience an urge or an uncertainty, like, ooh, what if I got an important email, or what if the love of my life just sent me a message, and if I don't respond right away, they're gonna go off with somebody else, and my life will be ruined. So experiencing that uncertainty, but then not reacting to it and making a choice to do something else. Because if I can learn how to do that around something simple like my phone, I'm going to be much more capable of learning how to do that around something that seems much more stressful, like the fear that I might leave the stove on, it's going to burn the house down. And so,
Yeah, that's
yeah. How did you
that's
get
really
started?
interesting.
Yeah, what did you find most useful when you first started making changes?
For me, the bipolar had become so prevalent in my life in manic episodes that I was convinced that if I got treatment, I was so productive, and I'd found a lot of commercial success in banking and other places and in venture capital where I was making a lot of money, and I thought, well, if I go get help and they put me on some medication that's going to make me walk around like I'm in a fog, I'm going to lose my edge. And so I was terrified to get help, but I knew something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the manic episodes were getting worse and worse and worse to the point where, and my psychiatrist in rehab told me this, she said, look, you're 1 or 2 away from death. Like, you can't survive these. You're going to overdose, or you're going to jump off a building. I mean, you're going to do something legitimately insane. And, so for me, I didn't want help until I crashed and burned, because the manic episodes and the addictions just kind of came to a head. And I found myself in rehab for substance abuse. And on day 2, my psychiatrist was like, you are classic case of type 1 bipolar. She's like, I didn't even need to meet with you. All I needed to do was read your file. Like, it's so it was the drinking and the drugging and the gambling and the sex addiction that sent me to rehab. And out of that, I got a diagnosis of type 1 bipolar, and I take lithium, and that's the only meds I take. I take lithium, and I go to recovery meetings, and I go almost every day, and that's it. But it started with addiction treatment.
Yeah, it's so common, right? That one of the things that I always try to explore, and one of the things that I liked about I saw the stuff that you're sharing and talking about getting proactive with mental health. I think one of the big challenges, and I always struggle with this in my work now, is like how to help people start to make changes before we crash and burn. Because I know I didn't do that. I didn't go to get help until kind of everything had ground to a halt. But it's so tough, right? Because we often don't go, and it's often like fears like that. Oh, like I'll just fix it, or like, oh, if I go and do something, I'll lose my edge. Because that
Right.
in other communities I hear coming up all the time too. It's very common in anxiety disorder and OCD communities to hear that same reasoning, because people say, "Oh, well, it helps me. I'm the one at work who always catches the problems before they happen. If I start to get treatment, am I going to become careless? Am I going to become sloppy? And I don't want that to happen." But I don't know. Yeah, have you found any good ways to inspire people? I don't know what the right word would be, to get proactive with mental health before
Oh,
it's
that's such a great
necessary.
question.
Yeah.
I haven't. I mean, if for me, my personal experience has been that there's kind of two buckets here. As far as I see it, there's the one that I'm in, and there's everyone else, right? I think that's how we all see the world. The bucket that I'm in are addicts, and when you are an addict, your brain will do everything that it can to kill you. Your brain will do every single thing that it can to get a fix. And if that is, it will lie to you, it will make you lie to other people. And so I think that if you have co occurrence, addiction, and mental illness, you're going to have a very hard time getting in for treatment for the mental illness because your addict brain is telling you you do not need help.
Yeah.
If you do not have an addiction issue and you just have a mental illness, there's no co occurrence going on. I think it might be easier to approach someone in that situation, but I don't know because I haven't lived that. Like I get really timid to project that because in recovery I've learned, and it's been kind of drilled into my head, that I just share my experience and I can't possibly speak for someone else.
Hmm.
But I would love it if there was an answer to how do you help someone before they hit rock bottom. I mean, that's the core answer I went into rehab with. I came out with that core question, and I came out with that question, and it's really honestly a central driving theme to everything I'm doing in the recovery community now is, can I ever get to a place where we could maybe say we could help somebody not have to go to rock bottom to get help? And I don't know.
Actually, what you bring up there, maybe that's just it. Like speaking up and talking about things and talking about taking care of mental health, because one of the things we lack. Right? So I always think about fitness. Like often, yeah, we don't take care of our physical fitness until there's some kind of problem. The doctor is like, you have to start exercising, or you're going to be lying on the floor very soon. But often we do start to exercise and get proactive with physical fitness. But often it's because we see somebody doing something we want to do. And in mental health, because people kind of keep mental health quiet, because people aren't open about their mental health, we don't see that, and so there isn't a sense that you could be doing something proactively. And so I think, yeah, it is really important that we're more open about mental health, because then people can start to say, oh, actually, that person is talking about something that I experienced that I didn't think was an issue. I didn't know I didn't have to spend 2 hours every night obsessing about conversations I had that day. Apparently there's another way to live, and then we can start to shift that. And so yeah, I think maybe it is, but we're at the very early stages of that, of people just starting to talk about mental health, which just seems so ridiculous to me, but is the reality. This is kind of like a new thing, even though people apparently have had brains for millennia, apparently, but now we're talking about them.
Yeah, we've been around for a really long time, and we've had mental illness since the beginning. I
Yes,
suppose. I mean,
absolutely.
it seems like it would make sense. I mean, we began this way. It's not like all of a sudden one day somebody went outside with their head wet and got a cold, and now we all have colds. Like we
Yeah.
started this way.
Yeah, and you can see, that's what I have to say. A lot of these things, you can see how back when we would have been cavemen, a lot of what we see with mental illness now, it could have been very useful to helping somebody survive. It just becomes problematic in our modern world.
Yeah, I think it was always around. And I think there's some circumstances to our human experience that have maybe not allowed us to document it or be aware of it. I mean, we only had an average life expectancy of 35 years for a long time. I mean, I didn't get hospitalized for mania until way after 35. So, it could be that some of these things didn't manifest themselves in that short of a time period, but they were still there. It's also our awareness of these issues. I mean, I was having a conversation the other day with someone, and they gave me this analogy that we, every couple decades at the best, we've been in a world war for most of our existence on this planet. We've all been warring. And for the last 70, 80 years, we have not had one. It's the first time that's ever happened. So we have multiple generations of people now on this planet who did not grow up in their, teenage and 20s and 30 years focusing on how do I survive war. So they have time to stop and think about, well, how do I survive better at everything else? And so now we're starting to turn inward for the first time as a species because we're not fighting each other all the time. And we're still fighting, of course, but we're not having global all-in total war like we have for pretty much all of our prior existence. And that's leading us to this place where we can turn inwards, which is awesome. And we need to start talking about it.
I find it's always funny, the one thing that comes up a lot, and I know I struggled with this, was even the letting things go well. That I was so accustomed to always trying to fix things and always having things basically in my head, but also around me to try to fight and avoid and control. And that fueled a lot of my life. I was basically wait for an anxiety, wait for something that I've labeled as bad, and then fix it. And then I only knew how to feel good about fixing problems. And one of the big shifts I had to make with taking care of my mental health was start to fuel my life with something else. Because I realized as much as I hated the stuff in my head, I'd become very dependent on it. I think sometimes, we do this in society where we just get used to this very easy practice of finding something wrong and then orienting ourselves around it. Okay, we're going to fix this problem. Okay, and then we're going to find another problem. And then we're going to find another problem. And what happens then is we make problems the prerequisite for action.
Yeah, reactive.
Yeah,
we get reactive.
Exactly, always reactive. And so making that shift to actually letting things go well and proactively building good things was very difficult. I didn't know how to do that. It was like relearning how to live, in my 30s, which was great. But I feel we often struggle with that.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to be proactive about your mental health. And I think it's, for me, even a year into recovery, I still need Headspace and Calm apps to ping me every some point every day and go, hey, remember me? Because I just need it.
It's useful. Yeah, it's useful to have those, whatever, especially when we're first, because it's after years of practicing something else, starting to practice something new. Anything we can do to give ourselves a structure around that as we learn how to do that is so beneficial, especially if it's stuff outside of our brains. Because I know my own brain, if I listen to it, I know where that goes. And that's not a useful place.
Right.
Yeah. So always, I find, and whatever it is, even if it's like a sticky note, I find to remind myself of, something I want to do, that actually I'm going to be much happier if I do that. It's just so useful.
This is interesting too. When we talk about proactive versus reactive, it brings up for me something that I think I saw a comment you made on Twitter or somewhere that, and I'm just going to quote this as best I can, but that chasing reassurance about recovery and engaging in compulsions around the right therapy is like burning your house down to find the fire extinguisher. And I feel like probably a lot of us are stuck in that cycle of, well, I don't know the perfect solution. And if I go see this therapist, it's not going to deal with this other problem over here. And so we don't know where to start. So we never start. Is that?
Yeah. And again, it's the putting the problem at the center. And so we're like, oh, I've got to fix this problem. And then, of course, we only make more problems trying to fix the problem. And I think part of this, like even when we think about stigma in general, I think a big part of it is like we designed the mental health care system to be stigmatizing and problem focused. Like the prerequisite to getting mental health help is disaster.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's right.
Yeah, like we don't do that in something like physical fitness. Like we don't say, okay, well, when you drown, we
don't throw you in jail for being fat. We throw you in jail for having a mental illness. Period. That's what we do in in the United States.
Yeah, because it's very, we're going to control this thing. Like this thing comes up, we don't know what to do about it, we're going to control it. And we don't do that in other areas. So like thinking about trying to get the right therapy is a bit like trying to find the right way to not drown.
I love this
And
analogy.
that's just not how we approach swimming. Yeah, we don't approach swimming like that. It's not about avoiding drowning. It's about learning how to swim. Like it's a separate thing. And you don't label yourself as having a drowning disorder. You don't see yourself as like, oh, I have this horrible disorder that I need to fix. And that's like
You say, I
across the
can't
board.
swim. I need to learn how to swim.
Exactly. It's about the thing you want to learn and build. And that's different. And so I think when we get focused on like, how do I find the right therapy? It's kind of like the wrong question.
Yeah.
And it's limiting as well, because that therapy is only going to take you out of the disaster.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a book or the tweet or a tweet, but there was this analogy that, we if you're afraid of drowning, you go learn how to swim, and then you build a swimming pool in your backyard and you enjoy swimming.
Yes.
We don't have anxiety pools. Like you which
That
I
would be
love this
amazing.
analogy.
I'm just going to go soak in my anxiety hot tub. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's almost like that's such a great analogy in a way, because it's what you said earlier, if you can sit with a thought or an idea about an urge, and you can sit with it and not act on it, you kind of are sitting in an anxiety hot tub at some point.
Yeah, it's useful to turn that into, I guess, the hot tub. Sure, you can take pleasure in it, but then thinking about the swimming pool, like, or even like a lake, an anxiety lake, where you can swim across it. You can actually, it's not a barrier. You're not thinking, oh, I have to walk around the lake because it's anxiety. Being able to say, oh, actually, look, an anxiety lake. I'm going to swim across it to go where I want to go.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Yeah, I find like that's what we're kind of missing sometimes in mental health. Like we're just like, oh, we have to fix the anxiety lake. But really, it's like, how do I help that person cross that lake to go where they want to go? And this is about helping them do the things they want to do in life. Because yeah, right now they can see their reaction to these feelings isn't helping them. And so yeah, just how do I help them do the things they want to do? And I think that's what we end up kind of missing. Like it's got to be about how do we do more of what we want to do in life? How do we go where we want to go?
So if I'm in that place and I'm standing on one side of that anxiety lake and I'm seeing it as a barrier, I'm afraid to swim across it. I've never gotten help before. I turned on the internet today and I heard this podcast and I hear this analogy and I think that makes sense to me. How do I start swimming? Where do you go?
Yeah, I think one of the things is to start with smaller uncertainties. So you can start with like the wading pool out back, just being like, oh, like, and so that's things like that, not checking your phone, like just noticing that simple uncertainty and then not reacting to it. And then progressively, what helped me was really progressively leveling up from there. And just always noticing when there is that kind of tug in my brain and that fear, that avoidance, like noticing, oh, there's uncertainty here. And it really helped to start with those simple things. Like even an uncertainty, might pop up that I was like, oh, did I say something wrong in that email I just sent? And then in the past, I would go and check the email. Or I might check a text message. You're like, ooh, did I say the right thing? Like maybe they haven't responded because they're offended or something like that. And often those things we don't see as being a mental health issue, but they are how we're interacting with uncertainty. Or to think of social media, like people posting something and then going to check how many likes it got. Those uncertainties just teach the brain to react even more to uncertainty. Because the brain is like, well, if you care about how many likes you got, well, then you're really going to care about whether somebody hates you, whether your partner's going to leave you, whether you're going to hurt somebody. And then it's very difficult not to react to those. So yeah, at first, swimming across the whole anxiety lake seems very difficult. And so just like with swimming, we've got to like build up and start small and just start to sit with uncomfortable feelings and swim across them. And I think part of that too is doing more of the things you want to do in life. Just in general. See, and orienting. For me, it really helped to orient recovery around doing more of the things I want to do. That it's got to be about that, not just like seeking out anxiety lakes for the sake of it.
What's a good way to learn how to do what you said, which is to sit with uncomfortable feelings more? Like, how do you do that the first time? What does that look like?
I think it looks like just like exercising for the first time. Like if you don't run and you went out and ran, you wouldn't get very far. You're going to be in a lot of pain. You might want to vomit. You're going to be sweating, gasping for breath. Like, it's very ugly. And I think sometimes that gets missed. Like, maybe like I'll often get messages from people saying like, oh, like I went to therapy and I started crying and I experienced more anxiety. Therapy doesn't work. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
But yeah, if you went to the gym and you tried to lift a weight and like you failed, you wouldn't see that as as something wrong with you. Like, that's the point.
Yeah. Getting to the point of failure is the point in the gym.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we know that's how you're going to build strength. That's how you're going to build flexibility, like pushing into these really difficult experiences. And so that's what I would say. Like, I think people expect when they first start working on this stuff that it's going to instantly feel good, but no, it should most likely instantly feel really bad because you haven't been doing it. Just like with physical fitness, like when you start to take care of your mental health and fitness, it's a sweaty, painful mess. That's what I would say. That was my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you? Was it easy and calm and smooth for you? What was it like when you first started making changes?
It was a total mess.
Yeah.
First thing my wife and my dad found me in a hotel room in Las Vegas, just not wanting to live. And
Yeah.
I went from there to rehab, and really didn't want anything to do with it. And I was unhappy about being there at first. And it took me a little while to kind of get to the point where I realized I'm not going to live, and I do want to live, and I need to get this stuff right. And I came home from rehab and I stayed in bed for 2 months.
Sure.
And for me, it wasn't until I started connecting with the recovery community and finding my way back to my faith that I had abandoned a long time ago. It was a multifaceted approach. I needed to, be getting involved in AA and SAA and therapy and going to church. And I needed to be doing a lot of things all at once. There was no one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's again. It's true. It's like all of these things end up changing, not just one particular thing or one particular symptom. It's our whole lives.
Yeah. And I think this
How
is,
did you?
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, no. I was just going to ask you, how was there anything that really helped with making that choice to stick with it? Like, you mentioned your faith there. Like, was it faith? Was it family? Like, what really helped say, oh yeah, like actually this is really difficult right now, but I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. For me, a couple things. It was once I don't know how to, I want to say once I figured it out, but I did, I don't think I ever figured it out. Once I started to feel like I was taking some initiative with my recovery,
Hmm.
I felt a way that I'd never felt before. And I didn't
Okay.
want to lose that feeling.
Yeah.
And I felt alive. And for the first time, I felt healthy. I felt well. I felt just, I don't know. I just felt a thing that I'd never felt before. And I just don't want to let it go. If I start motivating myself by, oh, I don't want to get in trouble, or I don't want to lose my this or my that, or I don't want to have this painful relationship issue to have to deal with, so I'm going to behave. I know me, that's not enough. Rules don't do it. The law doesn't do it. For me,
Yeah.
it's much higher than that. And for me, I had to get back to my faith, because what I've learned in sort of kind of digging back into the Bible and getting back to my faith is that God loves me no matter what. There's nothing I can do to make him love me more. There's nothing I can do to make him love me less. And that's just so powerful to me. It's just like, that's what they taught me in rehab too. But it wasn't about God. It was just that as a human, you have value because you exist. You are perfectly imperfect, and your esteem comes from within. And those were concepts that didn't make sense to me. And then when I heard them again in a different context, I was like, wow, okay, so everyone's been trying to tell me the same thing my whole life and I haven't been listening. Okay. I felt something different and I wanted to keep that feeling.
That's good. Yeah. I often hear that, and I think that was very similar for me, that like I was really helped just by coincidence. Kind of this one therapist I ended up working with, we just moved very quickly on making changes. And then I had that feeling like, oh, actually things can be different. And it's very, I think sometimes it's difficult to share that because you kind of have to experience it, I think.
Absolutely.
And that makes it hard to explain to people. Be like, no, go do all this. It'll feel terrible. And then you'll start to see that things can be different and you'll like that and you'll want to keep doing that. But there is definitely a massive hump to overcome to get there. And sometimes, it has a lot to do with esteem and how we view ourselves and viewing ourselves as inherently valuable. I find because that's not there at the time. Like I know, for me, it was like I was constantly trying to get all of this other stuff to fill that hole.
There's something that has to click.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to describe it. There's something that has to kind of click. The other night, I got my 1-year chip in my SAA meeting, since we're talking about sex addiction earlier, and I got to speak about what my last year has been like. And at the end, I got emotional telling my story and how the 12 promises have come true and just all the great things that have happened, but not without the hard stuff and the pain. I mean, there's been a lot of pain and,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of wreckage and damage. I mean, I still have consequences from crap that I did that was stupid when I was acting out. So,
Yeah.
that's just life. I got to deal with that stuff. And so the guy came up to me after the meeting and he said, "Hey, can I get your number?" I said, "Yes." He calls me the other day and he just says, "Man, I just want to get to the place where you were the other night when you were like had tears of joy about your recovery."
Yeah.
And he said, "I just can't get there." And we talked for a while, and it's one of those things where I can't tell him, "Hey, go do this thing, go do that thing, write this thing down this way, or do step 4 this way," or I can't, it doesn't work that way. You have to, I don't know how to say it. For me, I had to bang my head against the wall until things started to feel a little bit better. And then when they felt a little bit better, I said, "Okay, I'm going to keep doing that." When I let go of my resentments, I felt lighter. I felt heavier. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do step 5 now." I admitted to God, myself, and another human, the exact nature of my wrongs, meaning I sat down with my sponsor and told him every single thing I'd ever done to every single person bad on this planet, which took more than one sitting and many, many hours. And the just like a weight comes off your chest when you do that. And then I reached out to the people that I'd harmed and I offered to make amends to them. And that process, whether they responded or not, whether they came back and said to me, "Hey, man, that's cool. I'm glad you're getting help," or "Hey, F you, dude," or they didn't respond at all, didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was the fact
Yeah.
that I became willing to admit that I'd done something wrong, even if they had harmed me. I didn't care about what they did. I was focused solely on my part in it, and I reached out and offered to make it right. And doing that took this another weight off of me. And as I went through this process, the 12-step process, I just started to feel like I was alive. And I don't ever want to let that go. So I hope I'm not ever going to give it up. Somebody asked me the other day, an institutional investor emailed me and she goes, "How do I know you're not going to relapse?" Like she's looking at investing in my fund. And I showed her back and I was like, "You don't?" I said, "Any addict that tells you they're not going to relapse is lying to you. Maybe they won't. I might be sober for 30 years, but I'm just worried about today. I'm not going to promise you 5 years of sobriety. That's just way too, I have an addict brain. I can't promise anything like that." So anyway, I'm going kind of on a tangent, but I wanted to help this guy the other day, but there is no silver bullet. There's no, "Hey, I did it this way and it will work for you." There is, "I did it this way. Go ask 20 other people how they did it. And maybe some stories will resonate with you, and then go have those people tell you how to do their process."
Yeah. And it's like having a process and looking like in some ways that question that investor asked, I find is indicative of how we've kind of approached mental health wrong. Like we care only about like, ooh, like what about this risk here? Because like in fitness or something, again, like you go to the gym and you always could get injured. If you go swimming, you always could drown. But you have this process, you have this practice around building these skills, and you say, yeah, okay, this risk is there, but look, here are all the things I do to maintain and improve this skill. And so, yeah, you know what? I'm going to stretch. I'm always going to progressively push myself. I'm always going to try new things. I'm going to fuel this practice, etc. But yeah, there's always going to be a risk there. But look at all of this stuff I do to take care of myself and improve these skills I'm working on. And as long as we have that practice in our lives, we just keep investing in it and building. Yeah. And I think, yeah, there is an element of you can share some of that practice with others, but it's just like we do in other areas, like so useful to listen to how lots of different people are building those skills, how lots of different people are exercising, and then you develop your own process based on your context and what works for you, and you try all those different things. And yeah, but yeah, of course, always there's going to be that risk there, and that's fine. I could drop the weights on my foot tomorrow, and then I won't be able to do deadlifts for a year. But I'll still go to the gym.
Or you can just eat right.
Yeah, and you can just eat right too, and like all of those things are part of it. Yeah, the kind of fueling doing the things we want to do. But yeah, it's unfortunate that people, when it comes to mental health, people are still like, ooh, like you go swimming. Well, what if? How do I know you're not going to drown? Like, how? Why should I invest? Why should I invest in your company? You could drown tomorrow. You have a pool. I'm like, yeah, but that'll like I know how to swim.
That's really fascinating in a way. If you think about it, it's like if somebody was doing Ironman triathlons, you would invest in their company because they are fit and aggressive and strong and they have endurance. And that's a trait that you want to see them have as a company leader. But so if they fall off their bike, which is really likely, and they die or get hit by a car, you've lost your money in that investment, so to speak, just
Yeah,
making a rough analogy. So yeah, it's funny because that email came from, and I won't say who it is, but it came from a woman. She has a family office, very famous family, tens, hundreds of, I don't know how many billions of net worth. And she was a child actress, and she just sent me this one line email saying, "How do I know you're not going to relapse?" And I was like, I wrote her back like 3 paragraphs explaining why that was a bad question. I
yeah.
know she's not
No,
investing, and I really don't care.
yeah, no, it is like that's the thing that I found so weird. Even now, because I'll sometimes I'll be doing talks or something, and I'll they might put in the bio depending on what it is. Oh, like Mark is gonna like talk about his struggle with mental illness or managing mental illness, or like it often presents it in a way like, oh, like I have
It's so
this thing I'm
stigmatizing.
suffering from. Yeah. But I would say like no, like I'm like even thinking about a company. Oh, I would much rather invest in a company where the owner, whoever's running it, the people working there actually know how to take care of their mental health. And that's the thing. If somebody's had this experience and they're working on recovery, they know way more about being healthy than the person who's still working up to their crash, convinced that they don't have any mental health issues. Yeah, like we need to really reframe things around. Yeah, if you're taking care of your mental health, you're in a way healthier position than somebody who is still convinced they don't have mental health to take care of, and that's a problem for other people because they're going to put themselves in a position where they end up having their own little disaster. Yeah, we really have to start seeing it as a strength.
I love that. That's fantastic. I mean, I'm so excited I'm sitting over here going, man, I can't wait to get this out there so people can hear that. That's so good. One of the last things I wanted to ask about, because I think it relates to what we've been saying here, is stigma. And, where does it come from? Why is there so much stigma around mental health, and how do we address it?
Yeah, I think in part it comes from like we've been talking about. The system was really designed around it. Like nobody would exercise if you could only get a gym membership in exchange for admitting to having an illness. And like we in general, like even thinking about whether it's here in the public system in Canada or it's a private system and insurance is paying for it or something like that. Like you have to have a diagnosis to get help. It's you have to kind of say, okay, oh, I have this problem. And the moment we do something like that, we create stigma. And I think that's one part of it. Like we have to change how the system functions. Because even one of the things like there's huge. We're having not just when we look at a mental illness epidemic in North America, but in particular if you look at doctors and psychiatrists, like high suicide rates above the national averages. Really struggling. In psychiatrists, you see stats around like substance use higher than the national average. But one of the problems they run into in their profession is that they're constantly being asked, have you been treated for a mental illness within, like it depends on the college, but like within the last year, within the last 6 years, whatever. There's this kind of inherent stigma in so many professions to see getting help for mental health as an indicator of problems as opposed to an indicator of strength. It should be, if you're getting help for mental health, we should see that the same as you saying, oh, I have a gym membership, right? I'm actually taking care of myself. But in so many professions, including the professions that we expect to help people with mental health, they run into all of this stigma. And so until we address some of those systemic issues, I really think the stigma will persist. And so that's why I think it's really important then that we see kind of new mental health services popping up, led by people with experience of recovery, led by consumers, where they're seeing the gaps in the system and saying, look, the system's not going to change. That's a really big challenge. So I'm going to create something to fill those gaps. And I think, we have to do that. That the stigma is so ingrained in the system. People basically have to create a new system and a new way of doing mental health. And I think then we'll start to see stigma change when mental health is more about, hey, by taking care of it, I'm taking care of my health. I'm building something valuable. And then it becomes transformative.
Right on. Yeah, that's perfectly said. So, look, thank you for that. And look, thank you for coming on and doing this today. I am really grateful to have you here. I'm grateful that you responded to me stalking you down on the Twitter and
thank you.
Come on.
That's what social media is for. Stalking, right? That's why it was invented.
I'm just going to be honest and say that there's probably a probation officer somewhere that's going to have a problem with this comment.
Yeah, no, I mean, social media is about sharing valuable information. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is going to be, really helpful. So to people who listen, thank you again to Mark for coming on the show today and taking time to share with us. I think this conversation will be very helpful to a number of people. And for our listeners, as a reminder, you can connect directly with Mark through a number of ways, and I will link those in the show notes below. Finally, if you like this episode, feel free to share it on social media. And we would be very grateful if you would rate, review, and subscribe to the Stigma podcast on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you prefer. It helps our show a lot in rankings. It would be greatly appreciated. And if you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on Twitter at StigmaCast, and you can find us on our website at stigmapodcast.com. Please let us know your thoughts on the episode. And thank you for being here.